The title of his talk is Cloud Formations, a Framework for Cloud Decision Making. Please join me in welcoming Jim Davies.
Great, thanks. Morning, everyone. I guess I'm in the privileged spot between you and lunch, so we'll try to make this as quick and painless as possible. So we're in the middle of a big transformation, and I'm sure it's not the first time you've heard that this morning or the last time you heard in the conference. But this transformation from a large inventory of enterprise applications, largely deployed on-site, many deployed on appliance or server models, moving to the cloud is such a big transformation, it's going to take a very long time. Estimates vary, but in the order of a decade, I think is a pretty safe assumption. And any change that's this large and complicated is going to be made in a series of discrete changes. So we're going to be going through similar decision-making processes for each application class, whether that's the UC space we're in, or ERP, or email, or whatever application group you are looking at moving to the cloud. We're going to go through a similar decision-making process. Whenever you have a repeating decision, it behooves us to spend a little bit more time and think about some structure. Because if you're going to make fundamentally the same decision again and again, it was worthwhile to put some energy into the analytics to make that decision in a framework that allows you to make better decisions as time to come, and that the end game of all your cloudification of your enterprise is a consistent solution rather than a patchwork of individual separate decisions. But anytime you're speaking and you're getting information from someone, point of view always matters. So does changing slides. Let's come on. I'll try the other one over here. Oops, now we're 3 slides ahead. All right, we're going to back it up. One more back, please. One more forward, please. There we go. Life is good. So I thought I'd give you a little bit of context. Some of you may not know who I am or who Mitel is. Well, I'm the CTO at Mitel, technical guy through and through. You might have guessed that by looking at a slide describing my company, and it's a topology diagram. I mean, I probably didn't have to say I'm the CTO there. But anyways, that's where I'm coming from. I've been in the industry, technology industry, for my whole career. Mitel is a company that's been in the UC space and voice space for 30 years. And the first 15 years of that was very much on a PBX model. So that's a model where Mitel made the endpoints, the telephone sets, the switching fabric, the computing fabric, the software, and provided an ecosystem for our partners and sold it as essentially a stovepipe complete solution. In the last 15 years, we've gone through quite a remarkable transformation. And as a company, we really now, I think, are best described as a best-in-breed software company. Through the last 15 years, what we've done is we've abstracted away any detailed connection between the endpoints and our software, abstracted away the network, abstracted away the computing environment to allow us to offer a solution to our customers that look very much like this, where most of our value, 95% of the engineers that work for me write software. We're writing a very interesting and powerful business application that can be deployed in multiple different scenarios. That sits on top of a series of industry standard frameworks, mostly VMware today, but we're expanding off to several other ones that are more cloud-centric or more application-centric. And that is delivered to end users via a series of devices of their choice. There's a lot of discussion today about people saying, bring your own device, and I think it's actually a bit of a misnomer, and it should be more around choose your own. It doesn't matter so much who pays for it, it's who gets to choose it. So the end user, I mean, I'm probably case in point, I'm here up on the stage giving a keynote. In my pocket is my smartphone. It's turned off so you don't get the ba-dip on the microphone, but I'm so wedded to that device, I didn't leave it in the back room, like where my credit cards and my passport and all the other things are, but it's sitting here in my pocket. I mean, we're more wedded to this kind of technology than anything that's come before it. So if that's the environment that we live in, and that's where we're coming from, cloud is a very natural extension for Mitel of this strategy. It's just another deployment mechanism. In cloud, as an industry, we're doing what we'll have done for every other major transition. We're hyping it up in a very big way. And often, all the hype and excitement around it, what the net result is for a period of time, we confuse the matter, so it's harder to make what I would call rational, well-thought-out decisions. But if you boil it down and you look at it in any given application, You look at it, an application, it's a piece of software, and whether it's deployed on an appliance, in a private cloud, or in a public cloud, it's a piece of software that runs on fundamentally the same computing infrastructure, fundamentally over the same network, and to the identical end-user devices. And what cloud's adding to this equation is it's giving us some different economic points. It's pushing some different ways of paying for that service. And so it should be looked at as an extension of what we've done in IT rather than a replacement. And as I alluded to earlier, that we're going through a decision-making process that we're going to do several times for different applications in their company. And what I thought we'd do is spend some time talking about a framework, a simple framework, of how you can structure that decision-making to get a predictable and high-value outcome. So I'd contend it comes down to 3 questions, and they're pretty simple questions. 1, does the application meet my business requirement? Seems pretty darn obvious, but there's been some well-publicized cases in the recent history of people charging forward into a cloud, getting the exact deployment model that they want, and a very interesting commercial model, but having organ rejection from the user community because the application didn't meet their needs. Next, how do I want to deploy the application? And finally, how do I want to pay for it? I'll talk about each one of these a little bit more in a second, but I think the key point I want you to remember from this slide is these questions, as much as possible, try to keep the answers independent. And by that I mean, if you choose a given application, avoid an answer that says, well, if you choose my application, you have one way to deploy it, and you have one way to pay for it. Keeping these questions independent gives you a huge amount of flexibility, and as I'll show later on, that flexibility is a very valuable thing to IT organizations. So let's start first on the application. So it's by far, I think, the most important choice. You can back yourself out of maybe a wrong choice or change your mind more easily on the other 2 vectors. This one, if you get the wrong application, you get an application that does not meet the needs of your user community, there is no graceful way out of this, right? You are going to look bad, and it's going to be painful for everybody. But when you look at applications, I encourage you to separate what the application is doing for your business. And there's really 2 major classes of applications. Utility applications, and these are applications that are important to your business, but they don't differentiate your business. So they're the IT equivalent of electricity or water or gas. Yes, you need them to run your business, but no, you're not going to get ahead by those. And those utility applications, the criteria for choosing them is different than the differentiated ones. The criteria is a good enough criteria. And by good enough, I mean there is a set of feature, a bar you need to set, that if you get above it, it's got no more value to your business. So you establish the good enough criteria, you choose any applications that exceed that or fair play, and then you choose which application I would contend that you want to go with based on the commercials and flexibility on pricing and deployment models. Differentiated apps are a different story altogether. These are ones where you can get competitive advantage for your business. There is no ceiling or line that you draw across. A differentiated app that has more value is more valuable to your company. And now you're back into the detailed application analysis of spreadsheets with matrices and so on. But it's well worth it because you're going to differentiate your business. So let me give you a brief example from our experience. A couple years ago, we decided that we wanted to do something around email for Mitel, for our own internal use. And we went through this analysis and we said, you know what, for Mitel, email is a utility. We're not going to be a better company than Avaya or Cisco because of we choosing one email package or another. Spent quite a bit of time coming to a baseline criteria. And through a whole series of to's and fro's, we settled on Gmail as our answer. Just before we closed the deal, at the last minute, Google says, hey, we'll throw in Google Apps. And look at these cool things you can get with Google Apps. And you're going, wow, that's really great. You can have simultaneous editing. And I'm thinking all the things I can do with the R&D organization, sales and marketing. We can edit the same document at the same time. Then we deploy it. What happens is Gmail universally is well accepted. People say, you know what, Exchange was better. It had more features. But this is good enough, right? Happy. We're all happy clams. Google Apps ain't getting used. It has these cool features, but it just ain't good enough. I wouldn't dare do this presentation on Google Apps. And thankfully, because it was so late in the process, what we're able to do, we hadn't gotten rid of all our Microsoft infrastructure. So had we, as an IT organization, had the IT organization bet on that and gone forward, it would have been a nightmare. Right? So it's an example of, to me, in terms of good enough, you can't make up on a good price, i.e. free, for something that doesn't make the good enough criteria. So the final thought on apps is get it right, spend the time on those 3 questions, make sure you choose the right app that meets either the good enough or the differentiated analysis, because it's very, very painful to change it. Next question, how do I want to deploy the app? There's been a lot of discussion in this conference and lots of stuff on the web of all the different ways of taking that piece of software where you can put it in an appliance, a public cloud, my infrastructure, someone else's infrastructure. There is actually no bad decision. But I think the most important thing to remember is this isn't a one-time decision. Things change within your business. So you may be very happy going with a private cloud right now. Time rolls on, a year, 18 months, new CIO, different applications move down the line, you want to go public. Flexibility is really important within this vector, within this question. This is not a one-time decision. Maintain as much flexibility as you possibly can. Final dimension, how you will pay for it. So, I mean, there are all sorts of different ways of paying, and lots of companies have different angles. I think one of the things that cloud's really brought up to the forefront is variable models where you pay by use or you pay by some metered item as opposed to capital or a managed service pay. But I think, again, one of the key things to think through this is flexibility. So whatever one of these choices you choose, make sure you understand and ideally have it contractually captured of how you could change that decision. So if you start on a capital purchase, how do I turn that into a private cloud? How do I turn that into a public cloud? How much is this getting credited forward? And the first pushback you're going to get from partners is saying, oh, well, that's a different kettle of fish. You have to choose. If you buy it, well, that doesn't carry forward. Or if you rent it, none of that carries forward if you want to buy later. You know, it's horse hockey. Right? So when you look at intellectual property and software, it comes down to 2 things. You're paying for previous work that's already done. So, you know, I have a tower of 500 engineers working away, and they've been working at it for 30-odd years. Not all of that code carries forward, but there's a body of work that you're paying for. And you can pay for that by capital, or you can pay a chunk of that in your variable pay, you know, in terms of if you go and pay per use. Then there's a chunk that you're paying for if you're going for a cloud implementation, where you're paying for someone to run that infrastructure, you know, the infrastructure and the management of it. And then there's a part that you're paying for future value. You don't want to buy an app and have it static. You're paying for a chunk of that ongoing engineering effort on an ongoing basis. So if you're dealing with a partner and you say, well, I want to go for a capital purchase right now because I'm largely a capital model, but I think I want to go private cloud down the road, I think it is completely reasonable to say, I shouldn't have to rebuy that legacy again. Right? That should be off when I go to cloud. If I buy a capital now, I want it when I go forward, I want that out. It's completely reasonable that you're going to pay for the infrastructure, and I think it's very completely reasonable going forward that you're going to pay for the future value. But I mean, anyways, having that discussion before you put your money on the table is a position of a lot more power. I think the other thing to think about on this is the application lifespan. How long do you think the app is going to live? When you do the ROI analysis, and I'm sure lots of people in this room have been doing a lot of this, comparing cloud to buying this stuff, most of them cross over between the 4 and 5 year mark. And that's how it's engineered by most of the providers. So if I bought something 4.5, 5 years out, I would be on paper making more money than if I rent it. That's kind of where the pricing models is today. A couple of things to think about when you're going through that is variability. Do I have times where things peak and go up and down? So for instance, in our business, call centers can be, in the retail business, can be very peaky around Christmas. Tax departments very peaky around tax season. So the cloud offers some really interesting economic models of following those peaks. So you rent the average and pay for your peaks. Or are you going to keep an application for a very long time? Because if you're going to keep an application for a very long time, it starts to look like on paper it gets more interesting after 4 or 5 years. But the other factor I think you need to think into is erosion of price. How much is the price going to drop over time? Because if the price drops, cloud follows. Capital purchases, you're locked in. And the last point is commercial mobility, and that's really about being able to move between these options. And I suggest you build into the contract with your partners the ability to move from one area to another. So kind of wrapping this up all together, I think the engineer in me sees this as a three-dimensional independent variable problem, which is a cube. So each of the axes is, choose one being choose the right application, another one being choose the right location in terms of where you want to deploy it, the third being how you want to pay for it. And if you take a given application, the value to you is much higher if you can have flexibility in location and payment model. So if you have, for example, if you choose an application and you only have one way of paying for it and only one way to deploy it, you have one little cube, one little matrix square where you can be. You're very constrained. In the business, we call it sticky. As opposed to, if you choose a given application type, you can change where you deploy it, and you can change the way you pay for it. That gives you a whole plane, a lot more flexibility. And why do you care about flexibility? Because usually you pay for flexibility, but I think this is a different kind of situation. So I talked about a few of them. One of them is the ability to evolve your IT strategy. Well, you start public cloud and you want to move private, or you start private and you want to move public. But there's also some performance implications. If you have flexibility, partners perform better. If I know I have to live up to my SLA, and I know the pain for you to change is high, I may be slower to respond than I know if you can take this over. And I'll give you a really quick example of one of these cases where one of our partners have taken this and really reduced a number of the hurdles for folks to move to the cloud. So they're one of our service provider partners, and what they did is they took this cube and they built their whole engagement model of customers around it. So they spent the first part of their engagement model, they've spent a lot of time with the client mapping out what are their business needs, what's the right applications, here's the right solution. And then they say, how do you want to deploy that? You have 3 different choices. How do you want to pay for it? You have 5 different choices. And for each one of those choices, we'll show you how you can change it. You can't change the app, but you can change any one of those other pieces. For instance, let's say I don't meet my SLA. Oh, what are you going to do? So what they have built into their contract is what they say is, well, if I'm not meeting your SLA, you have the option of taking that virtual machine, which is running your software instance, and you can bring it back to your enterprise. Technically, this is how you do it. Commercially, this is what it means in terms of how payment flows stop and so on. You can choose to run it as a private cloud application at that point, or you can hand it off to another service provider who you think can meet the SLA. That flexibility is given the end user control. Because in the end of the day, when you look at it, what is really happening with cloud? What we're doing with cloud is we're taking this very wide IT waterfront of applications, and what we're trying to do is effectively move some of that responsibility into someone else's hands so we can focus where we can make business differentiation for our business. So you can effectively outsource responsibility, but you cannot outsource accountability. In the end of the day, for whatever reason, if that app doesn't work, it's the IT organization that is going to be held responsible. So by keeping the flexibility, is essentially what you're able to do is keep control that you need so you can effectively move to cloud. And that, giving up responsibility, but keeping control, man, that's a thing of beauty. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you very much for your time, and you can pop by our booth and visit us if you want.